Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. We're going on a journey into the hidden biology of stress. We'll explore how that overwhelmed, exhausted feeling does more than just ruin your mood. It literally reshapes the physical structure of your brain, shrinks your memory center, and can even alter the genetic legacy you pass down to your children. But don't panic. We also have the scientifically backed off switch to reverse the damage.
Yeah, it's a completely different way to look at it. We're so used to thinking of stress as just, a purely emotional state or a psychological burden. But at the cellular level, it's a very tangible physical force.
Exactly. I mean, think about your own life over the last few weeks. Have you been sleeping poorly? Like tossing and turning at 3 a.m. with your mind just racing? Or maybe you're finding yourself being a little more irritable, snapping at people you care about over something minor.
Right. Or forgetting small things.
Yes, losing your train of thought in meetings and just carrying this heavy feeling of being, well, totally overwhelmed by it all.
It is incredibly common. And it's vital to recognize that experiencing these things doesn't mean you're failing at managing your life. It means your body is functioning exactly as it evolved to function, just in the wrong environment. You are deeply biologically stressed out.
We really have to normalize this because everyone goes through it. And we also need to draw a clear line in the sand because the word stress gets this universally bad rap. But biologically, stress is a highly evolved survival mechanism, right?
Yeah.
It's the reason our ancestors survived. Like if you are stepping up to the starting line of a major sports competition or about to walk out on stage to give a massive public speech, a certain amount of stress is your best friend.
Oh, it's essential. It provides this incredible surge of extra energy, dilates your pupil so you can see better, and sharpens your focus to a razor's edge. Your body is basically giving you the physiological tools to handle an immediate, short-term challenge.
Right.
It mobilizes all your internal resources for a threat that's happening right now, and this is the crucial part, it's supposed to power down.
It's the biological equivalent of hitting the nitrous button in a race car. You get that incredible burst of performance. But you can't drive a car on nitrous all the time. The engine will literally melt down.
Yes, exactly.
And that brings us to chronic stress. It's the daily arguments, the relentless pressure at work, the endless doom scrolling on our phones. That constant low-grade grind is what causes the real structural damage.
And before we dive into the exact physical mechanics of how that damage happens, I just want to say, if you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button, because understanding this internal machinery is the absolute first step to fixing it.
Yeah, the distinction between an acute short-term challenge and a chronic inescapable burden really is the defining factor between a healthy brain and a degraded one. And when we talk about that internal machinery, it all starts with a specific communication network.
Right, the HPA axis. When I was looking through the research, this really stood out to me. The hypothalamus-pituitary-adrenal axis, as I understand it, is basically this superhighway of chemical communication, right?
That's a great way to put it. Starting deep inside the brain with the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland and sending signals all the way down to the adrenal glands on top of your kidneys.
Yeah, that is the master control system. When your brain detects a threat, whether that's an actual physical predator or just, a terrifying email from your boss, the hypothalamus releases a hormone that travels to the pituitary gland, which then releases its own hormone into the bloodstream, straight down to your adrenal glands, and they respond by pumping out cortisol and adrenaline.
So if we look at the body like a house, the brain is like the smoke detector sensing the danger. The HPA axis is the electrical wiring running through the walls, and cortisol is the loud, blaring alarm system that wakes you up and preps the body for sudden action.
That is a perfect analogy, and that alarm triggers a massive reallocation of resources. Cortisol actively constricts certain blood vessels to pull blood away from your skin and digestive organs, sending it straight to your major muscle groups.
Which is why people get cold hands or a stomachache when they're anxious.
Exactly. Your body is literally pausing digestion because processing lunch is not a priority if you are about to be eaten. It also floods your blood with glucose for instant muscle fuel.
So for a 5-minute escape from danger, it's a brilliant, life-saving system. But the problem is our modern environment. The alarm never shuts off. It just keeps ringing and ringing day in and day out.
Right. The system was never designed to be left in the on position, and eventually the sheer volume of that alarm starts breaking the windows. Short bursts of cortisol are great, but prolonged high levels completely wreak havoc on the brain.
So it stops being a survival tool and becomes what, like a toxin?
It essentially becomes a neurotoxin, yes. It targets and alters specific regions of the brain in highly destructive ways, and the first major battleground is the amygdala.
Okay, the amygdala. That's the almond-shaped cluster of neurons deep in the brain that acts as our fear center, right? It processes threat detection.
It does. And the biological reality of chronic stress is that the continuous presence of cortisol actually causes the amygdala to grow stronger.
Wait, strong?
Yes. The neural branches, the dendrites, they physically multiply and extend. They form new synaptic connections. The baseline activity levels spike, making the whole region hyperreactive.
So you're fundamentally building a bigger, faster, more sensitive threat detection machine in your head.
You are.
That explains so much about human behavior. Like, when you're already burned out, even a tiny inconvenience, dropping your keys or someone cutting you off in traffic, makes you want to completely explode.
Yeah.
Your fear center hasn't just reacted, it has physically adapted to see everything as a massive threat.
Exactly. It's practically on steroids. But while the amygdala is building all these new connections, another crucial area of the brain is actively deteriorating, and that's the hippocampus.
The hippocampus, which is responsible for learning, memory consolidation, and regulating stress, right?
Yes. And under the weight of all that cortisol, the electrical signals there just begin to fail.
I want to dig into how that deterioration actually happens, because it's not just a vague weakening, is it? Cortisol actually overloads the cells.
It does. It's a mechanism called excitotoxicity. High levels of cortisol cause an abnormal influx of calcium into the neurons. This overexcites the cells, they fire too rapidly, and exhaust their energy. To protect themselves from dying completely, they retract their branches. The physical connections literally pull apart and break.
Wow. The biological irony here is terrifying. The part of the brain that's supposed to calm us down gets physically dismantled, while the fear center builds new wiring and gets stronger. That's a vicious cycle.
It is a profound failure of the body's negative feedback loop. Normally, the hippocampus acts as the brakes for the HPA axis. Once a threat passes, it sends a signal to shut off the cortisol alarm. But when it weakens, your ability to control stress weakens right along with it.
So you lose the brakes on the car at the exact same time the accelerator gets permanently stuck to the floor, your amygdala is screaming danger, and your hippocampus is too damaged to stop the cortisol.
Right.
No wonder chronic stress feels impossible to escape. Your own anatomy is working against you. But degraded signals sound bad enough. Does this actually affect the physical size of the brain?
It does. I mean, the hard truth is that cortisol causes the brain to physically shrink.
Shrink, like actually lose mass.
Yes, through that loss of synaptic connections, and the most dramatic shrinkage heavily affects the prefrontal cortex.
Which is the area right behind the forehead.
Exactly, and that governs our executive functions. Deep concentration, complex decision-making, logical judgment, and navigating social interactions. Plus, because the brain is diverting energy to immediate survival, fewer new brain cells are formed in the hippocampus.
So when you can't focus on a simple task after a week of being overworked, or you read an email 3 times and it just doesn't register, it's not you being lazy. Your prefrontal cortex is literally shrinking.
Exactly. Reframing it from a personal failure to a physical, biological mechanism is so important.
The short-term effects are bad enough, but what happens if this goes on for years?
The long-term stakes are severe. The structural damage makes learning and remembering difficult, and it paves a clear biological pathway for severe clinical depression. Ultimately, it can lead to early cognitive decline and Alzheimer's disease.
The daily arguments and workplace pressures are actively threatening our long-term cognitive survival. That is just wow. But to fully understand this, we have to look even deeper, right? Down to the deepest level of biology, the DNA. When I read the source material on the epigenetic effects of stress, my jaw actually dropped.
It's a fascinating area of study.
Can the stress I experience today actually affect the genetics I was born with?
To understand that, we have to look at a landmark experiment involving mother rats and their pups. Researchers looked at 2 distinct groups of mothers. One group was highly nurturing, lots of feeding, licking, and grooming. The other group was neglectful, basically ignoring their pups.
So a clear difference in early childhood environments. High physical support versus extreme low support.
Right. And they found that the amount of nurturing a newborn pup received determined how they would respond to stress for their entire lives. It all came down to the development of cortisol receptors in their brains.
And these receptors act kind of like sponges, right? They soak up the cortisol until the brain to shut off the stress response?
Yes. The nurtured pups developed a high density of these receptors, so they grew up to be resilient, calm adults, much less sensitive to stress. The neglected pups had the exact opposite outcome. They developed very few receptors, couldn't shut off their stress response and were highly sensitive to stress for their entire lives.
When I first read this, I asked myself, did the stress actually mutate their DNA sequence? Like, did the genetic code change?
No, the DNA sequence itself didn't change at all. It was an epigenetic change.
Okay, can you explain epigenetics for us?
Sure. Epi means above or on top of. Epigenetics refers to chemical tags that physically attach to the DNA strand. They don't change the gene itself, but they change how the genome functions. They physically block the machinery from reading the gene, effectively turning it off.
So for the neglected pups, the stress caused a chemical tag to silence the gene for those cortisol receptors.
Exactly that.
It's like we have the same hardware or DNA, but chronic stress rewrites the software. And if we aren't careful, we pass that buggy software down to our kids.
Well, the good news is because it's just a chemical tag and not a mutation, it can be reversed. If they swapped a neglected pup to a nurturing mother, the tags were erased and the pup grew up perfectly resilient.
Environment completely overrode the biology.
Yeah.
But there is a massive shocker here, isn't there? If they weren't swapped.
Yes. If left unchanged, the epigenetic changes caused by just one neglectful mother were passed down to multiple future generations of rats. The consequences became hereditary.
Hold on, hereditary. We're inheriting the stress of our parents.
The stress pups had babies, and those babies were born with the exact same silenced gene and hypersensitive stress response.
The way I handle my life right now could leave chemical tags on my genes that alter the brain architecture of my kids. That is, we have to find a way to break the chain. How do we fix this? After that heavy realization, please tell me there's a cure.
There is. It's not all bad news. The effects of cortisol can be reversed, and the most powerful weapons we have are exercise and meditation.
Okay, I know people roll their eyes when they hear meditate and exercise because it sounds so generic.
Right, but we aren't just talking about feeling a little better. These are structural cures. Deep breathing, environmental awareness, focusing these actively reduce stress by stimulating the vagus nerve.
The vagus nerve.
Yeah.
And that physically stops the cortisol.
Yes, it engages your parasympathetic nervous system. It's the physiological brake pedal. And both exercise and meditation stimulate the release of BDNF, which is like fertilizer for the brain.
So it actually repairs the physical shrinkage.
Exactly. It promotes the birth of new neurons and literally increases the physical size of the hippocampus, which improves your memory and your ability to regulate that HPA axis.
You are structurally growing the brain back. To the listener, do not feel crushed by the pressures of daily life. When the emails are piling up, taking 5 minutes to do deep breathing isn't just taking a break. You are physically rebuilding your hippocampus. Control stress before it controls you.
It really highlights the profound connection between our daily behaviors and our cellular biology. We have the tools to reverse the damage.
We really do. We started this journey looking at the HPA axis, that hidden alarm system flooding us with cortisol. We saw how chronic stress turns the brain into a battleground, growing the fear-driven amygdala while actively shrinking our prefrontal cortex and destroying synapses. We even discovered how chemical tags alter our genetic software, allowing our daily stress to be inherited. But finally, we found the off switch, a simple deep breath and a moving body to physically rebuild our brains.
It's incredibly empowering.
It is. But it leaves me with one final lingering question for you to ponder on your own. If the chronic stress we experience today doesn't just change our own brains, but chemically tags the genes we pass on to our descendants, how is the unprecedented 247 chronic stress of our modern hyperconnected society going to shape the physical brains of the human race a few generations from now?